Hello, Pastor Rich here again with our next installment, session number 3 of 12-Minute Mark. Last time where we had finished, Jesus had just made his mission statement, I'm going to go out into the towns and villages and preach the gospel. That's why I've come. And so now here we're going to finish the very last section of chapter 1 and get into chapter 2. Really, we cover maybe my favorite story in the gospel this time. Here it goes. He's going out, and a man with leprosy comes to him, begging him on his knees, Lord, if you are willing, you can make me clean. Jesus, filled with compassion, reached out and touched the man. I am willing, he said, be clean. And immediately the leprosy left him and he was completely restored. Now Jesus sent him away with a stern warning. Do not tell anyone about this, but go, show yourself to the priest, offer the sacrifice Moses commanded you as a testimony for your cleansing. But instead the man went away and he began to broadcast it everywhere, spreading the news. And because of that, Jesus could no longer enter a town openly, but had to stay out in isolated places. But still people came to him from everywhere. Chapter 2. Now, some days later, when they had returned home, the news got out that he was back in the house. And so there were so many who gathered that there was no room left, not even outside the door, and Jesus taught the word to them. Some men came, 4 of them, carrying with them a paralytic on a mat. Since they could not get in because of the crowd, they made an opening on the roof above where Jesus was standing. And after they had torn through the roof, they lowered the mat that the man was lying on. When Jesus saw their faith, he said to him, Son, your sins are forgiven. Now there were some teachers of the law there who were thinking to themselves, what does this fellow talk like this? That's blasphemy. No one can forgive sins but God alone. Jesus, knowing in his spirit they were thinking these things in their heart, said to them, why are you thinking these things in your heart? Which is easier to say to the paralytic, your sins are forgiven, arise, take your mat and go home. But that you may know that the Son of Man has authority on earth to forgive sins, he said to the paralytic, get up, take your mat and go home. And he got up. He took his mat and walked out in full view of everyone, and the people were amazed, saying, we've never seen anything like this. Again, Jesus was walking along the lake, and he saw Levi, son of Alphaeus, sitting at the tax collector's booth. Follow me, Jesus told him. And Levi got up and followed him. Well, that night he was having dinner at Levi's house, and there were many other Pharisees and tax collectors, sinners, and there were many who followed him. But when some of the Pharisees saw that he was eating with tax collectors and sinners, they asked his disciples, why does he eat with tax collectors and sinners? And Jesus, upon hearing this, said, it is not the healthy who need the physician, but the sick. I have not come to call the righteous, but sinners. We'll cut off there just in case we don't make it in under 12 minutes. And here we see this first episode of Jesus going out, and someone with leprosy, a skin disease, actually a nerve disease that you see on the skin, comes to him. And every time we have a little healing or a story in Mark, it's not just about the healing. There's always something else to it, because he's healing people in mass. And so the actual episodes of the healings or the exorcisms or the encounters or the arguments always reveal something deeper than just the action itself. It's how Mark tells his story, the lessons through the actions. And here we have a leper who comes to him, and all of a sudden we're taken aback, because lepers aren't allowed by law to approach people. They're supposed to be out in the leper colony. And the leper comes and he makes an affirmation of faith. He comes with a confession. He doesn't come asking if Jesus could, or might he, or could he be able to. He's the only one who comes to Jesus making a statement of faith. If you are willing, you can make me clean. And of course, Jesus, then we see, is filled with compassion. In Mark, we see more emotion in Jesus than any other gospel. And so here we see his compassion. And then Jesus does the unthinkable. Jesus is always full of surprises. He's always doing the unexpected. He's always going outside the lines of of what is conventional because he's God. And he touches the man. And we're thinking, oh no, if he touches him, he's going to get leprosy, right? Everyone's scared to death about getting the virus. They don't want that. That's why people lock themselves away. That's why we put the infected away and we don't get near them, right? It's very real to us. And here Jesus goes out and he breaks all the rules. He's touching the leper. But Jesus is the only person who's ever lived who, whenever he touches that which is unclean, the uncleanness does not spread to him. Rather, because of his purity and his holiness, he spreads purity and holiness everywhere he touches. So the leprosy has no power over him. He has power over the leprosy, over whatever. And so the Old Testament system was always the cleanliness codes, and anything that's clean that gets touched, it's unclean. Jesus spreads cleanliness, purity everywhere he goes. He's unaffected by it. He can't catch it himself, nor will he spread it to others. And then he tells the guy, a little interesting conversation, as I mentioned before, the mark and secret. He says, now don't go spreading the word on this. Just go do the ceremonial sacrifice that Moses commanded for your cleansing. And instead, the guy goes away and he tells everyone about Jesus. It's kind of an interesting thing. We're supposed to go tell everyone. We typically don't. This guy's supposed to keep Jesus a secret, and he tells everyone. He's so excited he can't contain it. And then what we see is because of that, they actually have a role reversal. The leper now is the life of the party, and Jesus, I mentioned the crowd last time that would hound him. He tells this guy to be quiet for now because he doesn't want to be completely hampered by the crowd, and now Jesus is isolated. They sort of do a social status switch there at that. Jesus comes back to Capernaum, back to the house, and we have what I believe is perhaps the most bizarre story in the New Testament, and that's these, the teaching, and the crowd is there. It is jam-packed. You can't squeeze another person in. They're packed like sardines. And some guys come, 4 friends carrying a paralytic, and they get there, and you can imagine how their heart sinks. There's no way we're getting in there to him. There is no way. And I'd love to hear the conversation of which one of them said, that we'll come back tomorrow, and then maybe another one said, we'll come back next week. But someone said, maybe more than one, said, there's nothing stopping us from getting into where Jesus is. We don't know how long they've carried this guy, but nothing's going to stop us. They said, we can't get in the door. We'll make our own door through the roof. I refer to this little story as the home invasion. That's really what it is. They tear the roof off while Jesus is preaching, and you think, these guys are in trouble. You don't literally bring the roof crashing down in the middle of a sermon that Jesus is giving. And you think, man, Jesus is going to cast them into outer darkness. This is back at Peter's house. The mother-in-law who was sick and Jesus just healed her, and she just got the place perfect. And now these guys come and they tear the roof off of the place. And you think, what is Jesus going to do? And again, the unexpected happens, opposite of what we think. Jesus is not upset. The people don't cause a riot. Jesus sees this crazy activity, this what to us seems like vandalism, and calls it faith, and says, your sins are forgiven. Which is another crazy thing, because he didn't come all this way to get his sins forgiven. He came all this way to get healed. And then the Pharisees are sitting there, and they're thinking, this is blasphemy. This guy just can't pronounce forgiveness. No one can forgive sins but God alone. And the Pharisees are exactly right. That's the point. That's why Mark tells us what the Pharisees are thinking, because they're the smartest guys in the room. They know that only God can forgive sins. Only God can do this. The priests, they pronounce forgiveness based upon the sacrifice, but the actual forgiveness comes from God. And so these Pharisees sitting there say the right thing. Jesus knows what they're saying, and he says, I'm going to prove to you verse 10, that I have authority on earth to forgive sins. That's huge. That's a statement that only a God could make. And so he proves it by healing the man in addition to his forgiveness. The guy walks out, the people are amazed, and they're praising God, saying they've never seen anything like this. And no one had seen anything like this. It was the most amazing thing. And what that does is it tells us here from the beginning that this is God, because only God forgives sins. They're right. And Jesus proves that to everyone. And so Mark uses the Pharisees' doubt to prove that Jesus is, in fact, God right here. And keeping with the theme of Jesus doing the unexpected, he walks along the lake, and we think fisherman number 5 is going to be his follower, but he goes for a tax collector. The tax collector, he was completely disowned by his family. He wasn't allowed to be in the synagogue. He wasn't allowed to testify in Jewish court because he was a sellout to the Romans. He was the most hated person in his village. It was actually legal to lie to a tax collector without breaking the commandment not to bear false witness. That's how hated they were. And so the fisherman didn't have much status, but this guy, but he calls him. Not only does he call him and he follows, he goes to their house to eat, and the Pharisees now again after him. Why is he eating with these people? Why is he associating with these people? And again, what we see is the second mission statement from Jesus. The first one was, I must go out and preach. And now this one is, I've not come to call the righteous but sinners. I'm the great physician. Those are the ones who need me. So we see him mixing it up with anyone who will have him in there. And so that's our session 3, 12 minute mark. See you tomorrow. God bless.